Imagine this. A ship sailing the Atlantic seems perfectly fine. No storm damage, nothing obviously wrong. But when another ship gets closer, they find, well, nobody, just gone. An empty vessel, the ocean, the wind, and this huge riddle that people have been talking about for over 150 years now. This is the Mary Celeste, probably one of the most famous mysteries of the sea. So today, we're going to do a deep dive into what really happened. Forget the ghost stories for a minute. We're digging into the facts, the investigations, the modern analysis. You think you know the story, maybe not. There are some twists.
Right. Our goal here is really to peel back all those layers of dramatic stories. We need to separate out what actually happened from, the Hollywood version. We'll look at the clues they found, the real clues, and explore the most likely explanation that backs by evidence. This is for you if you're curious and want to get past all the noise and speculation to what the facts suggest.
Okay, so let's start with solid ground. Fact. 1872, the Mary Celeste is found adrift. No crew. That part's true. But here's where it gets really interesting. So many of the details you probably picture in your head, pure fiction.
That's exactly it. The story kind of faded for a bit, then this imaginative author brought it back. Big time. Exaggerated everything. We're talking about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Yeah, the Sherlock Holmes guy. Before he was famous, he wrote this story, J. Habakkuk Jeffson's Statement, I think it was called, used a pseudonym, W. Small. It was in the Cornhill magazine, January 1884. And he didn't just tell the story. He spiced it up a lot. Added things like, warm meals still on the table, tea boiling on the stove.
Oh yeah, I've heard those.
Right, and the ship sailing right into Gibraltar Harbor all by itself. Total fiction. But that's what stuck. Most people hear Mary Celeste and think of those exact details. They think it's fact. It's not.
Wow. It's amazing how a story can just take over, isn't it? And it wasn't just Conan Doyle either. There were other fakes that piled on, made it even harder to figure out what was real. Like, there's this magazine article in 1913. Some guy named Fosdyke claimed he was a stowaway, said he saw the whole crew go for a swim, sharks got him, and he somehow washed up in Africa.
Right. Completely unbelievable when you look closely.
And then in the 1920s, another author, Keating, he just flat out forged an article about a survivor named Pemberton, even wrote a whole book. The Great Mary Celeste Hoax.
Yeah, that one blew up in his face.
How so?
Well, people wanted to interview this Pemberton. Keating started making excuses, even offered a picture of his own dad claiming it was Pemberton.
No way.
Yep. It all unraveled pretty fast. He'd made the whole thing up. So what this really shows you, pretty clearly, is how a true event, even a mysterious one, can get totally twisted by a good story. It makes it really hard to know what's real unless you go back to the actual sources. Really underlines the power of narrative, doesn't it?
Okay, so enough about the fiction. Let's get to it. What are the real facts? What do we actually know about the Mary Celeste in that final voyage?
All right. The Mary Celeste. She was a merchant ship, a brigantine, not huge, about 33 meters long, 282 tons. Pretty new owners, actually. A group of investors had just bought her. The captain, Benjamin Briggs, he owned a third himself.
And the crew. It wasn't just sailors, right?
No, Captain Briggs had his wife with him and their baby daughter, plus 7 sailors.
They left from Staten Island, New York, November 1872, heading for Genoa, Italy. And the cargo, that's important too, isn't it? 701 barrels of pure grain alcohol.
Exactly. Intended for fortifying cheap Italian wine. America, with all its corn, was the cheapest place to get grain alcohol then. So a valuable cargo. According to the ship's log, the voyage started out pretty standard, relatively uneventful. Good weather, actually. Confirmed by another ship captain who was sailing about a week behind them. And that other ship, that was the Dei Gratia, similar ship carrying petroleum. Her captain was David Morehouse. Now, Morehouse and Briggs, they were friends, sailed together for years, knew each other well. The source calls it a happy coincidence they were on such similar routes. Turned out not so happy, though.
Right, because Morehouse is the one who found her.
Yeah.
Almost halfway between the Azores and Gibraltar, the Dei Gratia catches up, finds the Mary Celeste, just drifting, empty, must have been incredibly eerie, just seeing her out there, sails partly set, nobody at the helm.
Absolutely bizarre. So Morehouse sends a boarding party over, and they start finding these specific, crucial clues. First off, the yawl that's the ship's rowboat. Yeah. You can rig it with a sail, it was gone. It was usually stored on top of the main cargo hatch.
Gone. Just missing.
It's missing. And importantly, the railings on one side of the ship were lowered. That suggests they launched it properly. It wasn't ripped away by a storm or a wave. Then, the cargo hatches. The main one was covered where the yawl usually sat. But the forehatch, up front, and the lazarette hatch, near the back. Both of those were removed and stowed away neatly, open to the hold. exposing that alcohol cargo.
Okay. Why would they do that?
We'll get to that. Also the sales. She was only flying minimal sales, just the 4 lower topsail and 2 jebs. And modern analysis. It confirms her position was exactly where you'd expect if she'd just been drifting with the current since passing the Azores. No steering. And one more thing, the main peak halyard. That's basically the strongest rope on the ship. It was gone. Very likely it was the same rope found tied off, trailing in the water behind the ship when the De Gracia found her.
Trailing in the water. Oh, okay. What about water inside the ship? Was she sinking?
There was definitely water in the bilge, quite a bit, and in the cabins. But remember those open hatches? And an open skylight. She'd been drifting for at least 10 days. Weather had been getting rougher. It was actually consistent with taking on water through those openings, not a major leak.
So the key takeaway here is the ship itself was fine, seaworthy, plenty of supplies, no signs of violence, no major damage. Morehouse put a few of his own guys on her, sailed both ships to Gibraltar. Reported it, investigations started for insurance, salvage claims.
And this right here is where it gets really interesting. When they finally unloaded that cargo in Gibraltar, remember the 7,701 barrels of alcohol? 9 of them were empty.
Empty, like broken open.
No, that's the thing. Undamaged, just empty. And this changes everything.
Okay, 9 empty barrels. That is strange. So what does that do to those early theories people had? You know, the conspiracy stuff, Briggs and Morehouse planning it for insurance, or pirates, mutiny.
Yeah, those pretty much fell apart fast. The conspiracy fraud idea makes no financial sense for Briggs, the owner-captain. He'd lose money. Piracy or mutiny, there was just no evidence. No signs of a fight. Valuables were still there. Everything looked orderly apart from the missing crew. And we can definitely toss out the really fringe stuff. Water spouts, giant squid, sea quakes.
Sea quakes, like an earthquake at sea.
Yeah, someone proposed a sea quake, released embers from the stove. Crew panic, thinking the alcohol would ignite. But again, 0 damage to the ship that would suggest anything like that, just speculation.
Which brings us circling back to those 9 empty barrels. How does that explain it? How does missing alcohol explain a missing crew?
Okay, so here's the crucial bit they discovered about those barrels. Most were made of white oak. Good choice. White oak has closed cores, it's watertight, perfect for liquids. But those 9 empty barrels, they were made of red oak.
Red oak, what's the difference?
Big difference for liquids. Red oak has open pores. Liquids can seep right through the wood itself. It's fine for dry goods, but absolutely wrong for alcohol.
Right.
The company shipping the alcohol, Meisner Ackerman & Co., they just used the wrong barrels for those 9. A simple but critical mistake. So what happens? Over time, maybe even before they sailed, those red oak barrels start seeping alcohol. Alcohol evaporates fast, right? So the cargo hold starts filling up with flammable, potent alcohol fumes. You wouldn't necessarily see a big puddle, maybe just damp patches on the barrels, but the smell, the fumes would have been intense down there.
Wow. Okay, so a mistake in barrel construction leads to a hold full of explosive fumes. That makes sense of the open hatches. They were trying to vent it, trying to air it out.
Exactly. They knew there was a problem. They could smell it. They were trying to ventilate.
Although, ironically, isn't alcohol vapor heavier than air, so just opening the top hatches might not have cleared the lower hold very well?
Precisely. They were dealing with something dangerous, maybe without fully understanding the physics of it, doing what seemed logical. So putting it all together, the most compelling explanation is this. The crew became terrified of an imminent explosion or fire. Those fumes were alarming. They decided to evacuate, launched the yawl. Not in a blind panic, it seems quite orderly. They lowered the railings, stowed the hatches they removed. And Captain Briggs, he had the presence of mind to grab his sextant and chronometer, essential navigation tools, but left everything else non-essential behind.
But then, the tragedy. They took that precaution using the strongest rope they had, that main peak halyard, to tow the yawl behind the Mary Celeste. A safety line, basically. But something went wrong. We don't know exactly why, but the line either came loose or was cut or snapped.
And the Mary Celeste, even with just those few sails up, was moving just fast enough in the breeze
that the people in the small rowboat couldn't catch her.
Oh, that's awful to imagine, watching your ship sail away.
Exactly, a desperate situation. Once they realized they couldn't get back, Captain Briggs likely tried to make for the nearest land, Santa Maria Island in the Azores. But making landfall in a small, open boat from that far out in the Atlantic, it was incredibly dangerous, often fatal back then. Sadly, they never made it. The captain, his wife, his baby daughter, the 7 sailors, lost to the ocean.
And the ship itself. Those 10 days it drifted before the De Gracia found it.
That was enough time, with the open hatches and the motion of the sea, for the rest of those fumes from the 9 barrels to evaporate completely.
Which is why Morehouse's men didn't report smelling any alcohol when they boarded.
Right. It's pretty certain all that alcohol, maybe 450 gallons worth, escaped as vapor. And there's even a bit of modern science that adds weight to this.
Right.
Dr. Andrea Sella, chemist at University College London, back in 2006. He did this experiment, filled a box basically with paper cubes and butane gas, sparked it, got this big flash fire, looked dramatic, but it was so fast and cool it didn't even scorch the paper. His theory: something similar, maybe a small static spark or friction, could have happened in the Mary Celeste's hold with the ethanol vapor. Ethanol burns even cooler and quicker, maybe an invisible or faint blue flame. But that sudden whoosh, even if it did no damage, it would absolutely terrify the crew, make them think a massive explosion was seconds away.
Yeah, I can see that. That would be enough to make anyone abandon ship fast. So when you put all the evidence together, it really points overwhelmingly towards voluntary abandonment. We can't know the absolute final trigger, the exact second they decided to leave, but those fumes from the leaky red oak barrels are the most logical culprit. Captain Briggs made a decision based on a very real perceived danger. A reasonable decision, tragically, that just had the worst possible outcome.
Yeah, and if you connect this to the bigger picture, the Mary Celeste mystery, it isn't really about ghosts or sea monsters. It's a deeply human story.
Yeah.
A tragedy born from, like you said, a reasonable decision facing an invisible, dangerous threat. And it really shows how quickly solid facts can just dissolve these myths that have been around for ages.
It really does. This whole deep dive just highlights how powerful stories can be, how they shape what we think happened, and how important it is to actually look critically at the evidence, do the digging. Sometimes the answer is right there in the details, like the type of wood used for a barrel.
Which leaves a question for you, listening right now, to think about. How many other mysteries do we just accept? How often might a closer look, really examining the red oak barrels in a situation, reveal a perfectly rational, maybe sad but understandable explanation? What really stands out to you about how easily fiction managed to overshadow fact for so long in this case? Something to ponder.